slur discourse always goes down well, I'm sure this is going to be a really easy video to make and no one will have any opinions to the contrary. I'm not Pakistani, I'm mixed British Sri Lankan Tamil, which means that my heritage is as far away from Pakistan as you can get on the Eurasian continent. So why is it that the P word, among other things, is what 11-year-olds call me in my comments? If you look curry adjacent, as I do, this is our default slur in the UK. But can I even say it? I don't think just because you get called a slur, you automatically have the right to reclaim it. If they did, then every straight man, especially those who went to primary school before 2005, would have the ability to scream the F slur with the hard F in the faces of passers-by without fear of consequence. So I guess they do kind of have the power to reclaim it. Hard as it is to accept for some white American teenagers, not all slurs work the same way. Homophobic slurs, while just as rooted in bigotry as racist ones, do not operate on the same visual basis. You can take off the high heels, but you can't take off the melanin. Now, this doesn't mean that queer people should or even can become invisible to avoid being hate crimed. It just means that racism operates in a different way from homophobia. And wait until you hear about racism and homophobia, it's the combo. And as many people of colour will tell you, you can also get called second-hand slurs that prototypically pertain to a different ethnic group other than your own, because your average racist is just that stupid. But Asian people can still use these slurs against other groups. It doesn't give us the power to recontextualize these slurs for our own purposes. Ownership of racial slurs has more to do with visually belonging to the prototypical racial group that it's describing, aka the vast majority of the people who that slur affects. Phenotypically, the P word applies to me in the street and also applies to the vast majority of all British South Asians. But it's not like Pakistanis and the rest of South Asia really get on. Modi supporters, otherwise known as dickheads, will take any chance they can get to call a Pakistani a slur. But we're talking about this in a diaspora context, specifically the intersections where we are homogenized and racialized under white supremacy. The P word pertains specifically to us as a group. Like it or not, it's something that we have in common. And yes, we do live in a white supremacist country where British Asians are interpersonally and institutionally discriminated against. Don't let the man we currently have as PM fool you. Rishi Sunak is not brown. He is dark white. His real name is Raymond Smith and he loves warm Fosters and unseasoned chicken. Brown people, at least a few of the greediest ones, do have a habit of throwing each other under the bus for a taste of the white man's power, usually after moving up the class system, which in academic terms is called being a snaky cunt. Most of us though are not insulated sufficiently by class and other benefits to have developed this sort of intra-ethnic death drive, and so we have to go about our lives being called the P word partly because of these people's actions. Beyond the current state of discrimination in Britain, what makes the P word so offensive? What historical weight does it have? So P-word bashing was a wave of white British terror where white communities brutalized and murdered brown people throughout the UK in the 1960s, 70s and 80s. In 1985 alone, at the peak of the violence, there were 20,000 recorded such hate crimes. The P-word itself was first recorded in 1964 and was widely associated with a Conservative MP who was around at that same time called Enoch Powell. He's well known for his Rivers of Blood speech, which, if you've ever been unfortunate enough to spend more than 5 minutes with a Tory, you'll know is a cornerstone of capital C conservative, white supremacist, anti-immigrant ideology in the UK. He's kind of like a more successful Nigel Farage, because Nigel Farage doesn't have any speeches with names, apart from all the ones he does for £5 for teenagers on the internet, like this one.
I hope you enjoy a few pints with the lads tonight. Up the Ra!
Obviously, the British had been economically and politically fucking our shit up for the better half of a millennia at this point. But why do South Asians come to the UK in large numbers in the latter half of the 20th century specifically? In the case of the families of right-wing politicians like Rishi Sunak and Priti Patel, they worked as middle management for the British in their newer African colonies. The British Empire had this cute little phrase / official policy called divide et impera. No, I am not learning how to pronounce Latin. The British had a penchant for taking their pet people of colour around the world to do various odd jobs in their newer colonies. Pan-Africanist historian W.E.B. Du Bois described British Kenya as a system of imposed racial hierarchy. A black political consciousness arose for the first time in Kenya. Immediately, the Indians made a bid for the support of this new force and asked for rights and privileges for all British subjects, white, brown and black. As the Indian pressed his case, white South Africa rose in alarm. If the Indian became a recognised man, landholder and voter in Kenya, what of Natal? The British government speculated and procrastinated and then announced its decision. East Africa was primarily a trusteeship for the Africans and not for the Indians. The Indians then must be satisfied with limited industrial and political rights, while for the black native, the white Englishman spoke. It's worth saying that the vast majority of African Indians in the UK do not hold the same contempt for their fellow brown people as their current representatives in Parliament do. However, the vast majority of British Asians do not come from these African colonies and do not have these associated wealth privileges. Most of us were just looking for safety and peace in the aftermath of the largest and most deadly mass migration in human history, partition, which, after causing, the British were more than happy to take advantage of by importing foundry labourers, nurses, and railway workers to rebuild after World War II, right up until they realised that they were too racist to deal with seeing that many brown people on a daily basis. So they passed the Immigration Act of 1971 into law, which dramatically reduced our ability to come in unless you do a green card marriage. Thank you, mum. This is why a lot of the British Asians you know and love today are second or even third generation. This 20th century wave of Asian migration to Britain included a lot of people from the then Dominion of Pakistan, which at the time included Bangladesh, the most populous part of that union. Even after Bangladesh fought a liberation war for independence in 1971, and even after British Indians surpassed both groups in terms of migration numbers, that slur from that time has stuck, and it refers to all of us. This is a slur that is associated with state-sanctioned violence and brutality. It isn't just shop windows being smashed. It isn't just skinheads curb stomping elders. It's also immigration control administering virginity tests to brown women, no matter their citizenship, to find out if they really deserve to be in this country. It's intimidation by the police. It's housing segregation. This was a new peak of discrimination for British Asians, whose status as a racialized minority had been thrust into the national consciousness. British Asians obviously existed before, but not in the same numbers after the 60s. Every Asian diaspora in the West has faced discrimination. But unlike countries like the US, which took until 9/11 to properly give brown people the spotlight, the UK has a relatively longer history of anti-Asian racism in the media sphere. So that's what the P word means. That's what it represents. Any slur is bad, but every slur is different. Every word has different historical weight behind it. Not every slur is reclaimed at the same rate or has the same meaning to the same people. It's like that one meme with the white kid being really excited to say slurs. There is no uniform slur policy, but we as a community to whom the slur pertains have to work out what we want to do with it. While brown people of all religions get called it, the P word is associated with Pakistan, unsurprisingly, and also the rising tide of Islamophobia that the UK is currently drowning in. Pakistan as a name is less than 100 years old. The likely origin is an acronym coined by this guy, referring to 5 northern areas of the British Raj: Punjab, Afghania, Kashmir, Sindh, and Baluchistan. Before they were part of the British Raj, they were divided across various regional powers and kingdoms. So what do they have in common? I'll give you a clue. It's the same thing that the Daily Mail thinks causes cancer and climate change. That's right, Islam. While interreligious conflict as a concept probably dates back to when our ancestors were wading around in the primordial ooze, it is undeniable that the British colonizers stoked tensions between Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, and other religious groups. Remember that whole creepy Latin phrase they had about it? They did divide and conquer with any differences they could get their Richmond sausage-shaped hands on. Religion, caste, and, as Rishi has shown us, class. Churchill is alive and about under Buckingham Palace, and we're all just dancing to the rhythm of him sloshing around in there. So the P word isn't just racialized, it's also coded with Islamophobia. In general, a huge chunk of racism that British Asians face is coloured by Islamophobia. Why is this? First of all, most of us are Muslim, just demographically. I mean, I'm not, but that's because I'm quirky and not like other girls. Oh, and there's also all of those wars Western imperial powers have been waging in Muslim-majority countries for the past few decades or so, broadcast 24/7 by the most poisonous tabloidified media culture in the world. The bottom line is, racists, when it comes to shouting a slur at a brown person or going off visuals, they're not going to stop and ask you about your doctrinal opinions. In their head, they've already decided all they need to know about you. And this goes for other slurs too. British Asians don't have to be Hindu to be called a cow worshipper by Gary down the street who's shouting his Apu impression at you. The average racist either doesn't know because they're dumb or actively doesn't care because they're evil about our differences. So we shouldn't either... Nah, that's corny as fuck. Also, that sounds like we're doing what the white man wants us to do, and I don't like that. We should respect our differences while collectively organising for the liberation from the struggles that we all share, such as housing, police brutality, healthcare, education discrimination, hate crime, and much more. Slur discourse, because it boils down a whole host of racism-related issues down into one word, is both useful and counterproductive for the liberation of British Asians. Is it really helpful that the only time that the material oppression of British Asians gets airtime is when a children's entertainer / YouTuber calls us a slur? On the other hand, slur discourse is easily understandable and a good gateway to left-wing radicalization and the general liberation of people in the global south. Understanding and gatekeeping who can use a slur can be a way to keep communities safe and help them to organize. But then again, isn't the focus on slur discourse in media a feature of neoliberal identity politics where racial issues are reduced down to interpersonal matrices of etiquette of who can say what, rather than the hate behind the words itself and its material impact on our communities? I don't know, I think all of this is kind of true. It's all true. That's the end. It's difficult and no one's really got a definitive answer apart from me. British Asians, rise up now. I've activated Rishi's sleeper phrase. Curried crumpet, curried crumpet, curried crumpet. We're going to have Sharia law by the end of the week and a Shamima Begum in every household. Britannistan Zindabad. This has been The Motion Labour. I'll see you next time.